Does anyone remember this date, 24th of March? It was a Tuesday, 2020. Do you recall? Yes? I'm sure many of you recall, and most of you don't recall it fondly at all. I mean, I would be very surprised if anyone recalls it fondly. Of course, many of you might be in school, not the first row here, but most of you out there. Maybe many of you may be rejoicing that the school was going to be closed down, but you were not sure what was in store. So this was the date when the national lockdown was declared. It was a period of uncertainty. We did not know. We were fighting an enemy which we did not see unless you had a very powerful electron microscope, because we were fighting a war against a virus. And the virus was almost everywhere and anywhere and could go and jump around very, very fast. So if you see this one, again, fairly compressed, and you might not be able to read it, but sometime in late February, early March, one of the first deadly sort of examples of this disease came via someone in Kerala. And the Kerala health authorities were asking the question that I was asking, but in a different sort of a way. They were asking, were you here on this date, on this time, and so on. Essentially, you see 17 pieces of information here. They are kind of asking, were you here on the 3rd of March between 12 and 12:30 at the post office, or on the 4th of March at the jeweler's shop, or at a money exchange, or wherever it was? Now this, as you know, is a very inefficient way. I mean, even if you think about such a monumental day as 24th of March, you probably can't recall exactly where you were. You might not be able to recall it 3 weeks later. So this was really not an efficient way of recalling for a virus which was being transmitted very quickly and completely invisible. Two words came into our lives, for good or for bad: contact tracing. Contact tracing became a reality of our lives in that point of time. Love it, hate it. I don't think anyone loves it, but yeah, it was what it was. So two of my friends, very dear friends, and my colleagues at work, while I was at Make My Trip, called on me and said that, listen, we think we have a solution. They were not the only ones who had a solution. There were a lot of technologists around the world, around our country, who had a solution. The solution was a contact tracing, a method which would be secure and private and reliable and scalable. Now, as I said, they were not the only ones. There were a whole bunch of people who had a lot of great ideas. Interestingly, many private players proposed to the government. The government itself had its own set of people internally working on that. They had roped in a lot of IITs, including IIT Madras, to do a lot of verification on these claims, because everyone was claiming, hey, mine is faster, better, scalable, secure, reliable, etc., etc. So the question is it really what it claims to be? So IIT Madras, there were also professors from MIT. Obviously, there's a bunch of Indians out there sitting in MIT who were very volunteering to help. So they ran through a whole bunch of tests. And as it emerged, actually, no, I should wait for that. So the other question that I had for my friends, of course, is that why were they calling on me? I'm a designer. I'm not a technologist per se. I mean, I work in the tech world, but my forte is primarily design. I think they had a very interesting thought around it. They said, well, we are going to be talking about contact tracing, who you met, but we really cannot give away who you met and what went wrong and why was it. It's just a breach of privacy, right? What we are saying is, we're talking about probability. Because of your movement and accidentally or coincidentally someone's presence, you might be susceptible to picking up the virus there. What we were talking about is something called probability. Now, communicating probability is extremely hard. It's not the easiest one. Professors out there will probably say, how do you even communicate probabilities? And I think my mind raced back to my 12th standard days or 11th standard days, where you had lots of theorems and, it's complicated, it's bad, it gives me bad nightmares. So how do you communicate probability to a 36-year-old, to a 29-year-old, to a 59-year-old person in Darbhanga in Bihar, or in Murshidabad in West Bengal, or in Ernakulam in Kerala. I mean, some of them are illiterate, some of them are literate, but communicating probability even to your mom and dad is hard. I mean, how do you communicate probability? This was the challenge. So interestingly, as we moved ahead, as a number of experts validated scalability, reliability, security, and privacy, and so on and so forth, as it happens, thanks also partly to all these wonderful things and thanks partly to the design, we moved to a virtual roundtable. Remember, by then, in March, we are already in a lockdown. We are in a virtual roundtable in a manthan of sorts. So we moved into this roundtable, which is comprising not of gods and demons who are churning against each other, no demigods here, no semigods here, but we are a bunch of experts with highly opinionated points of view who have come from different points, different sort of things. Most of us have never worked together except for a bunch of the technologist friends and me. We have epidemiologists from Oxford and Cambridge. We have doctors and experts from ICMR, which is the Indian Council for Medical Research. We have experts from Niti Aayog. We have a very senior bureaucrat from the Prime Minister's office. We have a privacy lawyer who's very, very well known and has a very strong point of view. He's also a very well-known published author on privacy laws within India. And we have a bunch of people who have never worked together. And this is Manthan Time Begins. And Manthan Time begins every day from 10 to 12, Monday to Sunday. Sunday is a little shorter because it's Sunday. It doesn't matter because we are all stuck at home, all of us, in all our different ways. So what we do is, over a period of extremely short 3 weeks, which is even in a commercial, typical organization, this is 10x that speed. If people say elephants can't dance, you would probably be sort of really kind of surprised to see how quickly we can move when people are empowered to make decisions and make it quickly in the face of a danger which we have never ever seen before, not for a century. And in a century's time, what happened then was something we are unearthing bits and pieces. Our response is extremely different. So the first version, I'm sure all of you have seen it, love it or hate it. Of course, there will be many people who hate it for the obvious reasons. And this continued to come out every day. Every day at 6:30 a.m. we would work 24 hours round the clock. That manthan, that virtual roundtable would be our discussion board. We would review what has happened in the past 24 hours. What have been the reports coming? What are we seeing? How are people taking it? Interestingly, we did virtual researches as well. We reached out to people within many parts of India, in Telangana, in Hyderabad, in Uttarakhand, in Kashmir, you name it. We kind of reached out, people who spoke the languages and so on. So, a couple of things which come to mind. And this, interestingly, is the very first version of it, what you see on the extreme right. It was fairly verbose. And India is a country with such a high level of illiteracy. And again, if you think about probability as a concept, and I remember ICMR doing the first round where they wanted a very verbose disclaimer. This would have not made sense to anyone. I mean, not even the most erudite PhD scholar per se. So we went on day 4, we launched what you would have seen, which is the red-green, which anyway is something that we were working and playing around with. But where the moments of churn, where the moments of manthan came through, was the points where we said something which was controversial, something which was completely opposite to what we do in the commercial world. An example here is this one. You could do self-assessment. Day 3, we launched self-assessment. You could do self-assessment. Day 4, suddenly we saw there was going to be a huge outbreak in Varanasi because people were testing, seemed to be indicating that they were ill. They might actually sort of have the symptoms of COVID. So instantly 600 people were deployed on the ground to call all these people and say, hey, are you sure? What's happening? I mean, is there a temperature? Is there something running? And the feedback which came back was, hey, the app can't do too much. And I was just playing around, fooling around with the app. So I did assessment about 5 times and it just pushed out the wrong data. Now, so instantly what we did was to introduce friction. Now, this is counterintuitive to all the apps that you see and that you use. Here, what we did was to add friction. If you did the test once, the self-assessment test, you would not be able to do it for another 6 hours. If you did it once, even for the first time, it would ask you many questions. Are you sure this data will be used to sort of allocate resources in your area? So you sure about it, and so on and so forth. So we added friction. We added friction where the idea was that if you got infected, you could upload your data. That is the first time the data would be uploaded. But what if a child by mistake uploads the data? I mean, this can happen just playing around with the phone. That's what it made us kind of add more friction. Are you sure this will go into the government website, blah, blah, blah. 3 more questions. So I think this is where we did something very counterintuitive. The other one was this, of course, which you've seen within a matter of a month. We published this into 14 languages. We, of course, had a lot of volunteers working with us. We had people like Amitabh Bachchan volunteering to sort of use audio video to sort of spread the message, because that went much faster than reading something, and this is India again. Interestingly, people started reading stats and data, which you see out there. People became very aware of, everyone was reading stats and data and reading all sorts of things, which is very unusual kind of. You had, so if many of you might remember, especially our generation, we would remember things like Adarsh Balak sort of a thing, which is like the Adarsh Balak does that. It's like those big charts, wall charts, where you have this kid doing whatever kind of thing. We use that sort of a mnemonic to reach out to a much larger public per se. The interesting part was that while on the one hand, and Amitabh Bachchan volunteered, on the other hand, and the Indian cricket team and so on the other hand, a lot of designers, writers, professors, they all volunteered. There were professors from North India who said, how can we make the Hindi more colloquial and not very officious, because you have to have this conversational language. We had people from Assam, people from Gujarat, from Bengal, different parts of the country who were volunteering the time. They would do it overnight because we had a release every night, every day. And so, as we promised, the churn stopped. I mean, we got out of it within 3 months, handed it over to the government, whatever. Got a lot of pushback, a lot of fights, a lot of counter sort of points overall. Of course, the code which was requested by a lot of different people was made public. Interestingly, not made public just for people to scrutinize what code it was and how safe and secure it was, but made publicly available the code, I mean to say. The code was made publicly available to governments around the world so they could use this as a way to develop their own contact tracing app. Interestingly, the protocol that we adopted was something within about 7 to 8 months. Both Apple and Android came up saying this is also the protocol. So again, we probably ended up in the same place, both from the OS manufacturers and from the other part of it. And I'm happy that we exited, and I'm happy that we ended this whole thing, because I hope that it never comes back again. If I were to sort of take away some of those things, in every churn, there's going a lot of poison. There is no churn where there is nectar and no poison, or there is no elixir, because we started the search for an elixir, but what happened was that you get a lot of poison in every possible way. We saw it all across in many, many ways. The question is, how do you deal with that poison? How do you deal with that venom which defines how the future shapes up? May there be churn, but may you find that elixir as well and find ways to deal with that poison. You have to be the churner as well as the drinker, as well as the person who actually digests and gets rid of the poison as well. So with that, thank you so much.